Afternoon and welcome back to the Galway Film Fleadh. My name is Will Fitzgearld, the programmer here at the Fleadh, and it's my absolute pleasure to have been able to include this wonderful new documentary as part of this year's lineup. And it's my privilege now to be joined by the director, Pat Collins, and the man himself, Henry Glassie, joining us from the States. Thanks, fellows, for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks very much. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Good stuff. It's so great to be able to talk to you. I suppose if we just kick off with you, Pat, first of all, let me say to anyone watching along at home, throw us your questions with hashtag FilmFleadh, and I'll pick them out and I'll pass them on to Pat and Henry. But Pat, I suppose if we start at the beginning, I seem to remember you telling me that this all sort of, the idea of making a documentary about Henry with Henry came from listening to a radio interview back in the day.
Yeah, I was coming back from a shoot somewhere, and it was a program called Arts Night that Vincent Woods presented. I think it was back in 2010, I think. And I thought the interview was mesmerizing in terms of the way how articulate Henry was and the ideas that he was talking about in relation to art, in relation to his upbringing, in relation to the work that he did as a folklorist, and I think I contacted Vincent Woods and got an address from him for Henry, and maybe like it might have been a year later, I'm not sure, but I wrote to him, and then 3 months later he wrote back, and Henry doesn't really do email, so it was a very slow process. So it'll be maybe 3 or 4 letters over the course of 3 or 4 years, and eventually I think I suggested the idea of a documentary, and again it just took years to kind of take shape, in the sense that there wasn't I think it wasn't until Henry and Pravina finished their book Sacred Art, which they had researched and written in Brazil, and they were going back to Brazil, and it just kind of slowly kind of took shape that this would be a good way to kind of begin the documentary. Would be by following Henry and Pravina going to Brazil and meeting the artists that they had spent, maybe 10 years spending time with and standing with, as Henry says, as opposed to studying. But it was, and then it kind of took shape. We knew we weren't going to go to Turkey. We knew that we were going to go to maybe North Carolina and meet the artist that Henry's next book was going to be about, and then that we'd go back in time to Ireland and Turkey, and so. But it was a kind of a slow process, but it was kind of working very, very collaboratively with Henry and trying to figure out what the best way of reflecting and I suppose representing his work and the type of work that he does. And I think there's no point in me trying to kind of enforce a kind of a style on the documentary, such as kind of just evolved out of working with Henry and working with the artists that Henry was working with as well. So it was very, very slow, but kind of over years. But I think it was very sure of itself as well, to a certain extent.
Yeah, I loved how, it felt as if you were, I suppose once you gave yourself over to it, that intentionally slow pace, I guess it was informed by Henry's method of working, like you said, in terms of allowing the artists to create. It's about what they're creating and not what you're creating, I suppose, you as the filmmaker.
Exactly. It's kind of like we honestly were trying to include Henry in some of the footage in Brazil, but Henry would catch Henry in the frame, and then he seemed to have a kind of real knowledge of how wide the frame was, because every time he was in the frame with the artists, he just back out of the frame, and I suppose it took us a while to be sure how Henry was fitting into the documentary to a certain extent, and it wasn't until we'd finished we'd done one interview with Henry in Brazil, and then when we got to Bloomington in Indiana, we talked for 2 days then on camera, but we were continuously trying to find a way to include Henry. But I think that's, again, you have to kind of listen to that, and the fact that Henry was backing away in a way, it was kind of, you have to kind of respect that as well and listen to Henry, and I think that was the right way to do it, was because the first 50 minutes of the film is practically trying to, in a way, the way it's evolved is that it's trying to reflect Henry's work, and then we get to know Henry as the film goes on, and I think that came from Henry, I don't know if it was part of Henry's master plan or not, but it was the way the film evolved, and I think it was the best way for it to happen. But Henry might have more maybe it was part of he was controlling everything.
Henry, does this sound at all familiar to you in terms of your approach? Like when you moved to a new community, and you're trying to insert yourself, you're trying to get to know the people, you know, that sort of introducing yourself and then drawing back, like Pat is talking about.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, Pat's description of what happened is very accurate, and so I don't have any disagreement at all with the things that he said. But the whole idea is patience. The whole idea is patience. Lady Gregory, the great folklorist from Ireland, said patience and reverence are the keys to the kind of work that I do, and patience and reverence are exactly right. I have reverence for the people, and I have patience to be able to get to understand them in terms of their own lives. And so Pat and I actually worked beautifully together. I mean, to me, the great delight of this thing was working with Pat and Colin and Bob and Roman and, you know, Tom and Tina and Ashley. I mean, that was the thrill for me, is getting to know them as a group of human beings. And we fit right together, and it was just quite wonderful. But the idea, I think, that's interesting about this film to me is that our work, the kind of work that Praveen and I do, the kind of work that I've done for my entire life, is very slow and very inexpensive. Pat's work has got to be fast, and it is very expensive. And so in a way, there was a kind of combination between his work, which had to move quickly because he had a large team of people. They were all being paid. There's a lot of money involved, extremely expensive machinery. We just go into the back country and wait, and just wait for things to happen. Things do happen. They always happen. They always happen with tremendous richness. I mean, when I first came to Ireland many, many, many years ago, I just came to a place that looked pretty, and I just sat down and waited. And I waited for a decade. And at the end of that decade, I had an understanding that I could report to the world that seemed to me accurate enough. But basically, Pat's patience, I'll tell you what was the thrill to me, was his movie Song of Granite. And in Song of Granite, there's a woman who sings a Galway shawl. He let her perform the entire song. I hate movies in which there are little snatches of music. I love the whole performance. And when I saw that Pat allowed that woman to do that lovely song, I said, he and I can work together. There's no problem. We will have a comparable patience, a comparable affection, a comparable respect for the people that we're involving in the film. And so we brought those people in and just took time with them, as much time as we possibly could. The time was of the essence, but in this case, fast time and slow time had to figure out ways to work together, and they did.
That's fantastic. And Pat, you know, so the shoot itself might have had to have been actually quite, you know, quick. As Henry said, it's expensive business. But how did you do then with the editing process? Because I remember we actually had initially talked about this, like, I mean, I think it was last FLA, and it wasn't ready at that point. So did you take quite a long time with putting the final film together?
Yeah, I think we shot in like in May, I think, in 2018, and then we edited. That was in Brazil, and then we edited the Brazilian section, and then we shot in North Carolina, and we came back and we edited that, and then we started kind of. I'm not sure how many weeks, I can't remember, but it must be very close to maybe 20 weeks or more. And so it was we shot then in Ireland as well, in the middle of the edit. So it was over the course of a year, or maybe more actually, like a year and 3 months, year and 4 months. And it was actually, it's interesting as well about the shooting, and just to go back to that, like if I was going to do something about artists working in Brazil, like there's no way that you could find like say Samuel Rodriguez, the blacksmith. I mean, you couldn't go with a kind of a normal production model and arrive into Salvador and find him, because even with Henry, it took 3 or 4 days before we heard back of where Samuel was, because he, you know, maybe he lives in the street, or, you know, and so it was kind of it was actually impossible. It would have been impossible to do what we did without Henry and Pravina having had laid the groundwork. So when we came into Salvador, everything in a way had been arranged, maybe very loosely, but it had been arranged, and we had already discussed who are the most likely people to be in the. Because I think I'd read a draft of the book as well, and it was very obvious who were the really interesting people as well. And they're all interesting, but some people are kind of more interesting on camera than other people, I suppose. So.
But you worked with Colin throughout the different locations.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, and I think again, it's you know, the idea of working with the same crew, if possible, across the whole of. I think it makes a huge difference. It's not impossible to do it the other way, but I think the relationships that you build up are very important, and especially as well with, say, you know, it was a great. I'm not sure, but I'm sure it was a great comfort to Henry and Pravina, you know, that we had the same crew, that we got to know each other, you know, in a deeper way. I think it is kind of a lifelong thing, and you try to kind of maintain the relationships you have with people that you work with, like all through your life. It isn't just the kind of for the production schedule, I don't think, or it shouldn't be at least. And
Absolutely.
So it's kind of, and it has to be enjoyable as well. It doesn't have to be, you know, hardship. So you try to, at this stage, I try to work with friends as much as I possibly can, you know.
Yeah. Henry, on that, you know, long-term relationships, Ballymun must have changed a lot to you from the time that you spent living there.
I'm not sure that I might have missed the question, but look. Yeah, Pravina's giving me a hint, but I'm still not quite sure what the question was, but long-term.
Sorry, I was just asking about Ballymun and if you have seen a lot of change in it in terms of, you know, long-term relationships, still being in touch with the people there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize for that, but the reason is that I was listening so hard to Pat that I had concocted while Pat was talking a whole long diatribe that was going to be exactly in relationship to what he had said, and so I wanted to talk about Sam well. Ballymun has changed in very dramatically. The fact is, it's a country place, and country places in Ireland have undergone. Think about this: I was there in 1972. I came in 1972, and so that I've stayed in touch with everybody all the time. But everybody that I knew and loved is gone. Everybody is gone. But even more dramatically, the landscape has dramatically changed as a result of, I was there before the European Union. When I was first in Ballymun, there was no electricity, there was no running water. That was a kind of blessing I didn't understand. I thought it was not uncommon. It wouldn't have been uncommon, let's say, in North Carolina for things to be like that. Ireland wasn't somehow behind the times. It was just the way that rural life was at that time. But the change in the population has been tremendous. The change in the landscape has been tremendous. But here's what I would say is positive about all of that change. It's kept the families in place. The dramatic changes that would be comparable in the United States, what would be most obvious is that absolutely nobody from 50 years ago would still be living in place. That would be true of my own family from rural Virginia. There's absolutely nobody in the place. My grandmother was one of 13 children. They all had little farms. They're 100% gone. The kind of economic changes that have occurred in the countryside in the United States are different from those that have happened in Ireland. And the blessing in Ireland is that when I go back to Ballymun, I'm talking to the grandchildren of the people that I knew. The families are there, they're in place. They've got new houses. The houses are not as beautiful to my eye as the ones from the past. The music is different. The stories are different. The life is different, but the people are there. And I think that's really terrific. So I go back to Ballymun. My friend Barney is there, and we go back and visit and stay with him. And it's a wonderful time. And so that I see the grandchildren of the people that I knew. And generally, we had a wonderful event not so long ago in Ballymun. It was actually at the Arnie Parochial Hall. And there were more people in that room than there had been people in Ballymun when I was first there. And it was just it was a love fest. Everybody was grateful to me for having talked to their grandparents and having recorded the history. And it was pretty plain that one man said, "We're so grateful to you because you recorded the old traditions and we could forget them." Now
Oh,
they're in your
wow.
book. We don't have to worry about them. But
That's
Ballymun
kind
has
of
certainly
poignant.
changed. It's changed tremendously, but I have affection for the land and affection for the people that abides, and the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the people that I loved are still there, and that's a wonderful thing for me.
And was that appreciation of the book there initially when it came out, or is that something that's can be more celebrated now, you know, by the people that it's about, with time removed from when it was published?
I think that might be true outside of the community, but I think that within the community, the approval was immediate. I wrote it at the very beginning, and this, you know, I was there from 72 to 83, and in 82 I published a very large book about Ballymun, of it 880 pages, and it was really too long, and the people would look at it and say, well, we're never going to read that thing, but we're really happy it's there. But I also produced, it's actually mentioned late in the film, I produced a very small book too, and I gave a copy of that book to every single house in every household in Ballymun. And when I go back now, it just pleases me tremendously that it's wrecked, it's been read, it's been torn apart, it's been preserved. And so that actually I would say that the appreciation within the community was quite immediate. Insofar as there's appreciation beyond the community, I don't even know that exists, but if it exists, it's probably developed very slowly over time. But certainly the work that I did there, let me say that it's really highly collaborative. I don't come in with a set vision at all. That's already been mentioned. I'm patient, and certainly the people in Ballymun were very patient. They had, they said the man made time, made a lot of it, and so that there was plenty of time for us to sit. Very long conversations that took place at the hearth. I lived right there. I was there all the time. And so that we, by the time that the book was out, it was really, as Michael Boyle, one of the heroes of the book, said, it's our work, not my work, not his work, but our work. That's exactly the way that Michael Boyle saw it. And he was thrilled that all this information that he had been saving up for his entire life, all of that tremendous hard work that he'd done as a local oral historian, had been put on tape. Wonderful. He was delighted by it. Just delighted.
Absolutely.
I think that a lot of time when people don't stay long enough to really become friends, then the kind of intrusion can be negative. But if you're there for as long as I was, I mean, everybody wondering who in the world I was made up the story that I was the son of Peter Flanagan's sister who lived in New York. That's not true, but it was a way to bring me in and make me somehow a relative. And so that was P. Flanagan's sister's son. Yeah, she lives in New York, and here he is. But, if you're going to come back to a community of 153 people and stay for 10 years, they got to make up a story about you.
Yeah,
but
you got to have an in. That's
what
very Irish.
That's the way I do it. I make friends. I meet people. I follow one person to another. I met everybody. One of the things that I enjoyed about the original book, Passing the Time in Ballymun, is that every single person in the community is in the index. I had to stretch for some of them, believe me, but I made sure that even the little kids are in there, so that anybody who was alive in that community in that time is at least in the index. But the heroes of the book are few: Ellen Cutler, Peter Flanagan, Hugh Nolan, Michael Boyle, Hugh Patrick Owens. There were a small number of people that were my guides. They were my teachers. I treated them in exactly the same way that any student would treat a teacher, with respect and affection.
That's great. You've been to Galway as well, haven't you? I think you've lectured in NUIG here.
Oh, many times, sure. Many times I've been to Galway. I actually have to have some photographs of Galway in 1972 that if you look at them today, you can't believe that that's the same city. But no, so I've been to Galway a number of times. It's a lovely city. I went everywhere in Ireland because my original attraction to Ireland was through literature. It's not through genealogy. And I love the writings of E.S.N. Evans. And Evans generalized in a wonderful book, The Personality of Ireland, which caused me to want to not only spend, as I did, a tremendous amount of time in a little place called Ballymun in South Fermanagh, but I went everywhere, quite intentionally went everywhere in order to experience the breadth of the landscape and diversity of the landscape, and fell in love, as anyone with eyes would, with the Irish landscape as well as the Irish people.
That's wonderful. That's really aspirational, actually. Pat, was one of kind of the aspirations of the film when you were making it to perhaps more than just making a film about Henry, but to maybe shine a bit of a light on the work that he and other folklorists do, maybe kind of lifting it out of the realm of academia a bit, and you know, by making a film, making it more accessible?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if I think folklore for some reason is kind of maybe an obsession of mine in some ways, but I've always been drawn to the idea of folklore and folk collectors, and I suppose it's maybe my own experience of making documentaries is kind of similar to it, and that you're going into communities, or you're going into houses of people, and you're trying to to work with them, as Henry would talk about. You're trying not to exploit them, which is, it's always much more dangerous, I think, with making films about people. So you have to work very hard for them to trust you. But it's I think it's not in any way academic as such. I think what I'm trying to do actually was, I was just trying to get Henry's ideas about art out to a wider audience, I think, and to share them. And like when I heard Henry talking on the radio in Ireland, or in Arts Night show, I think it was his democratic kind of take on art that I really thought was, I hadn't heard it expressed in that way. And it was something that I felt that I did think that myself, but I wasn't maybe able to articulate it in the same way that Henry was. Because I think coming from a small village in West Cork, my experience was exactly the same. And you know, and it's that, like, I could categorically say that I've never ever met anybody who doesn't have an appreciation for art, and I just genuinely believe that. And that's whether it's a football match, or whether it's you know, but people could dismiss that as saying, well, you know, a football match isn't art, and it's kind of true, but they do have an appreciation for who's graceful, or whose movement is graceful, and who has a style about them. So everybody is drawn to it. Or farmers that I grew up amongst would have a great appreciation for the ploughed field, or for making drills for potatoes or whatever. I mean, they wouldn't just be responding to it in terms of it being straight. I think it's to do with the overall aesthetic of it. And I think Henry probably believes that we're all like aesthetic animals. We're wired for it. And I think it's probably true. And I suppose I never kind of appreciated the way art became so kind of narrow and such a kind of middle class concern. I kind of felt that art had been taken away from ordinary people. And I suppose that's one of my own kind of interests, is kind of saying, well, look at the person who sings a song in a pub, and look at the people who are listening to it, and they all have an appreciation for it. They can all analyze it, and they can say why it's good or why it's not good, or why somebody is a good singer. And I think that's also to do with it, like, just because it's not within a frame and it's kind of visual art, or it's not you know, an installation, just because a farmer doesn't like an installation doesn't mean they don't have an appreciation for art. You know, it's kind of, I think the view of commercial art has become so narrow, and so it defines the whole culture, that it's actually not useful at all, really, and it's not true to life, I think. But again, I think Henry should talk about that, because Henry's actually much more articulate than I am talking about it. And but I think it's something worth pushing out there, in the sense that, because I do feel that it's been taken away from people, and I would just wish that it wasn't, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe more.
Before I actually, instead of kicking over to Henry on that, I by way of before we wrap up, I'd like to ask Henry, as someone who's so well traveled, this past year with the world in lockdown, what has that meant to you? Has it affected you? Have you been in touch with some of the communities you've traveled to? How's it affected them?
Absolutely. It's horrible for me, because I don't just sit here in little Indiana and worry about little Indiana. Believe me, we made that movie in Brazil. I'm tremendously worried about Brazil. Brazil happens to be run by the same kind of idiot that the United States is. And that kind of horrible person like we have and they have has led to directly to the deaths of tremendous numbers of mostly poor and Black people. I mean, I could go on, but I will say that Pat has talked about the democratizing of art. My goal in the democratizing of art really feeds off a kind of hatred of class prejudice. And that shows up in this. It's not just a matter of this terrible disease that's spreading around the world. It's killing Black people off in tremendous numbers. It's killing Native American people off. I mean, the people who are despised by the world, those people are being murdered by a disease that is almost directly being caused by monstrous directors of big countries. That's a little bit negative, but the point is, what I want to do is to democratize art. That's exactly what Pat's talking about. But my goal is not to just be sensitive to the poor or some foolishness like. It's to celebrate the fact that people without money can be great artists. They can play sports, which what Pat was talking about. They can make carpentry. They can make a beautiful dinner. There's a fantastic ability that the human being has innately. All human beings have the right to creativity. And when that creativity is thwarted by economic forces, it infuriates me. But when it's liberated by the courage of individual people like Hugh Nolan, like Jorge Padapal, like the very people that are featured in this film, it's wonderful to me. This is wonderful. It is exactly a celebration of the equality of the human spirit and its capacity to create things despite conditions like this pandemic. So one of the things that happened in the pandemic, people are figuring out other ways to be creative. They're figuring out lots of other ways to work out their lives, and I admire them for it. But my deepest concern is a sadness for the way that this disease is sweeping across the world and picking the poorest among us to kill.
Yeah. It's tragic, and as you said, it's affecting the most vulnerable members of society. Pat, has the time has it been useful in terms of a time to reflect for you, and anything that you're working on at the moment?
Well, the work that I haven't, the work hasn't changed to a certain extent. I mean, it's just given me much more time to develop, and we were in the middle of an edit with another documentary about Michael Keegan-Dolan and Chop Dowser, that dance company that are based on Dingle, and so we had to stop the edit, and we probably won't be going back into that for another month or two. And so a lot of time for development. I mean, in a very privileged position to be kind of maybe living in the country and having plenty of space, but it's we've been kind of working but not earning anything, but we've been able to survive, which is great. And but it's been, I suppose it's I actually really enjoyed it for the first month. I know that's a very privileged thing to say, but it was kind of, maybe I needed the break or something. I don't know. It's very difficult, I know, for a lot of people, but it allowed me time to kind of focus on what I wanted to do and kind of prioritize what I want to do, in the next few years as well. Now that I'm not getting any younger, I want to focus and just work on the things that I want to, that I really want to work on, And
yeah.
But
we sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I'm finished.
Well, I was simply going to say that we'll definitely, we'll look forward to those future projects, and as restrictions ease, I hope, Henry, that you'll be able to go on many more trips, and that there will be many more books. I want to thank you both for joining us at this year's Online Galway Film Fleadh, and for sharing this wonderful film with us. Again, Henry, as you said, Pat, has articulated best when he described it as such a celebration of art and beauty and human creativity. I hope everyone watching at home enjoyed it as much as I did. And thanks again to you both for joining us. Cheers.
Thank you
Thanks
very
very
much.
much for
Thanks
having
a
it
lot.
on. Thank you. Okay.